What was the catalyst for writing my book? Well, I think my documentary, I did a BBC documentary about 4 years ago where I investigated my own psychotic breakdown, and I was confronted with all this stuff, all these facts, truths that I'd sort of buried. And although it was a really tough experience for me to experience that, and a really kind of disturbing and disruptive place to find myself. Once I'd sort of dealt with it and got over everything, and started to process everything and started to understand some of the things that happened to me, I really felt that I needed to get it out and write about it, because I thought it could help people. And I initially just tweeted out, rather foolishly I think, that I had had a breakdown. I think it was World Mental Health Day, and I just tweeted out that randomly tweeted out that as somebody who's had a breakdown, just want to say, take care of yourself today and, get some help if you can. And just the overwhelming response to that tweet. I remember because that day, because I was flying to America, and I kind of turned my phone off and got on a plane, and when I got off the other end in America, there were like 40,000 retweets. And I was initially a little bit overwhelmed, and initially a little bit scared, but I couldn't believe the responses from it. And it was all from people who had similar experiences, who just wanted to say how relieved they were and how thankful they were that somebody who they deem as successful, or somebody who was successful, had admitted to having had struggled. So that was my first inkling that I needed to do something. And then once I'd been through the documentary and had the experience, I thought, I need to write a book about this. And that was the initial response. But the catalyst, I think, was George Floyd. The morning George Floyd was murdered, and a few days later there was I think we were all locked down. We were all watching the TV that year, at that time, and all around the world there were these spontaneous marches, people marching in support of Black lives, and there seemed to be a sense in England that, that doesn't really happen here. We don't have racism in England. That's an American problem. And I thought to myself, that's not really the case, because that's not how I grew up. I grew up being regularly chased by skinheads and having NF sprayed on doors and being told to go back to where I came from. And I thought to myself, I need to tell this story of what it was like as a young man growing up on the streets of Birmingham. And they all sort of dovetail into each other, which is, as I say, my dual identity as an Englishman, but also as a black person. So that's when I literally that morning, when the George Floyd thing was kicking off, that morning I literally sat down and wrote the first chapter. It took me about 10 minutes. It just spewed out of me. I wrote about 10,000 words. And that chapter is called There Ain't No Black in the Union Jack, which is what people used to say to me when I was a kid. That was really the inspiration. That was the morning I actually literally sat down and started. I didn't even know it was a book at that time. I just thought, I've got to get this out. And I wrote, as I say, I wrote my first initial feelings, and my agent said, keep going, that's a book. And that was it. I then wrote 9 other chapters. I don't know whether my documentary shaped the book, but I think my documentary certainly inspired the book. I mean, if I hadn't gone through that experience and been confronted with my own buried truths, I certainly wouldn't have been in the position to write the book. But I would say everything really started with that documentary, and being confronted with the trauma that I'd buried for so long. Once that was kind of presented to me, it took me about 2 or 3 years to sort of process it, and it was a very uncomfortable 2 or 3 years, because I was dealing with I was very vulnerable, because people were literally stopping me in the street and engaging me in conversations that I'd never had before, telling me about their mums who'd had a breakdown, or their dads who'd had a breakdown, or their uncles who'd had breakdowns, or their mum's friend who'd been sectioned, and all these people were just coming out of the woodwork and talking to me about mental health for the first time in my life, anyway. So that was a very uncomfortable time, but having been through it and processed everything, and finally got to a place of strength, I think, I then thought to myself, I need to write this book. And I'm constantly amazed by people who still contact me on Twitter or Instagram and just say, I've read your book, thank you, that happened to my dad, that happened to my... And it's the most common form of mental illness, psychosis, but nobody talks about it because I guess people are a little bit ashamed of it because it's where you get, it's the one where you get taken away, where you lose your mind. But fortunately, I have no shame, and I've come through the other end and built a successful career. So I just want to give back to all those people who do feel perhaps a little bit ashamed, that there's a way forward and that they shouldn't be ashamed of it, because it's a common experience and many people come through it and come through it better and stronger. So that's why I wrote the book, just as an inspiration to all those people. Favorite acting experience probably was Homeland, and doing Homeland. I was pretty much on down to my last dime, shall we say, when I got Homeland. I hadn't worked for a while, and a very good friend of mine had passed away, and I'd sort of lost that spark, I lost that belief in myself, and I got a call out of the blue from my American manager saying, put yourself on tape, and I initially refused because I couldn't be bothered, but I put myself on tape, and then about a week later they phoned up and said, you got it. And strangely enough, it was my best friend who died. The day I got it was his birthday, the year after. So kind of thank him and thank my lucky stars, because that changed my whole career. And working with Claire Danes, Mandy Patinkin, Damian Lewis on some fantastic scenes was really the height of my career and great fun. And then going to the Emmys, from being, really on my arse, basically, to the next year being in LA at the Golden Globes, shaking hands with Sidney Poitier was, quite a turnaround, really. So the whole experience for me was fantastic. Sharing the story, I've got to be honest with you, I thought initially I'd made a really big mistake, and I was really worried that I'd let too many people in, open the curtain and let too many people in. And I was extremely vulnerable for a good couple of months. Because, I showed people myself at my weakest point in my life. So I was initially really, really vulnerable. And as I said, it was odd to have people come up to me on the street and engage me in conversations about it. And quite often, you'd find yourself just crying your eyes out on the street with a complete stranger who had had a similar experience, or whose parents had had a similar experience, or whose brothers had had it. I mean, literally, I couldn't walk up the street without somebody stopping me and saying, just want to say thank you so much, because, so it was a really weird time. But I think, having processed everything and processed the documentary, written a book about it, I've sort of come through that vulnerability into a place of strength, really, where I'm much more front-footed with it and in a better place to deal with it. And it's great. It's been quite strengthening. And it's interesting. I was at a friend of mine's documentary the other day, and he was talking about being adopted and how he's really only dealing with that now. And I said to him, I tweeted him this morning, and I said, you're probably feeling really vulnerable right now. I said, but I just want to let you know that this will pass and you'll get through to a place of strength. And he went, you're absolutely right. So I haven't left the house in 2 days because he'd just seen the documentary. And it's an odd place to be, but you do come through it. And as with everything, you have bad times and good times in this life. And I think that even though it was a tough experience. I really wouldn't have missed it, because it's been incredibly strengthening for me and inspiring for others, and I'm glad that others have taken strength from it. There's an organisation called Black Minds Matter who have supported me during this book, and I'm sure there are others, but I'm just glad that the book and the documentary and the success of me talking about this issue has really resonated and brought people out, brought people together. I think that's been one of the things I'm most pleased about, because it has focused attention on the effects that racism can have on mental health. It's also brought attention to particularly brought attention to the overrepresentation of black people in the mental health system, and that sparked conversation as to why that should be. So just very proud of everything that the book's achieved, and very proud of instigating the conversation.